got Rob Duvall again, community activist. We'll call him.
That's right.
On the panel. Welcome. And our special guest is Ted Arnott, the member of Provincial Parliament for Wellington, Halton Hills. Got it right that time.
You sure did. Thanks.
Yeah,
Great to be here.
Nice to have you here. Thanks for participating in this live show.
I'm delighted to be here, and great to be here with Rob as well.
Okay, and to our viewers, we want to remind you that we want you to participate in this show as well. If you've got a topic or you want to get involved in the topic that we're discussing, all you have to do is get on Twitter and tweet me at #TheIssue. So we're going to be talking tonight, guys, a little bit about the power plant. But first of all, there's been some recent news, and I think I'll turn it over to Rob about Metrolinx.
I knew we were going to be talking a little bit about Metrolinx tonight, and I think I almost drove right off the highway as I was driving here. But yeah, someone has actually had charges laid against them for accepting bribes from developers for Metrolinx, and that's not going to bode well. Metrolinx is a little bit broken anyway, especially out in this region. I think it's a real concern. This region is growing so rapidly. I can't think of any other situation where you have an area very close to the largest metropolitan city in Canada that's growing at 10 times the rate of any other place in North America, and they're not bringing proper transit to this area. To me, that's a big problem, and we can see it just by hopping in our cars every day. There's more and more cars on these highways that really can't expand very much, especially around the escarpment out here. And there seems to be no plan in place for the next 15 to 20 years. None at all. To me, that's a real issue, and it's a broken problem here.
Well, so. Ted, your party has been critical of Metrolinx for quite some time, and I guess this is just the icing on the cake.
Well, first of all, I'm concerned about this. Obviously, this news. I haven't heard the details, and it wouldn't be responsible for me as a provincial member of Parliament to really comment on charges that have been laid and an issue that's before the courts. But at the same time, it is very troubling and serious concern, and I'll look forward to hearing more about it. At the same time, Metrolinx has an important responsibility, and is charged with the responsibility by the provincial government for coordinating and improving all the transportation modes through the GTA as well as the Hamilton area. And yeah, we're in opposition, and we point out the flaws and drawbacks of what's been happening. And we have to question what progress has been made towards the Big Move project. We're very concerned about that too. And I think, you hit the nail on the head when you talk about the commuter who has to get to work and has to get home again. Our leader, Tim Hudak, made that a big issue during the last provincial election in the 2011 election. I think that going forward to the next election, we will be speaking to that issue again, and when our platform is ultimately developed and released. Because the fact is, we haven't, over the years, kept up with the need for transit improvements through our area, as well as improving the highways for the people who drive, and also the movement of goods, which is very important to our economy. And where there's congestion, it costs money for businesses, but most importantly, I think for commuters who can't get home or can't get to work quickly, it's annoyance, and it's time away from their families, and perhaps time away from work that they would otherwise be able to perform. So yeah, it's a big concern, huge concern for our area, and I drive the 401 to get to Toronto too, and occasionally take the GO train. So I experience it firsthand, and certainly see what the problems are.
You've got an issue, don't you, with Highway 6 and 401? Is that still on the books?
Oh, it is. I have a private member's resolution that I tabled in the legislature as soon as I could when the House resumed sitting. And it's actually the very first resolution on the order paper, so really? No one can miss it. And it calls upon the government to put the proposed Morriston bypass on the ministry's 5-year plan for new construction. So Morriston is a small community just south of the 401, south of Guelph, and there is it's a built-up area where the houses and the commercial businesses are very close together across the road. It's a 2-lane stretch through there, and the lineups are literally kilometers long. people coming off the 401 to go to Hamilton down Highway 6, or in the case of many people coming up Highway 6 from Hamilton to get onto the 401. And there just needs to be a bypass built around the community. We've been calling for this for a long time.
You've been calling for it for a long time.
And working with the Township Council, the Township of Puslinch. Some people, I think, see this as a local issue. It is a local issue for the residents of Morriston, but more importantly, it's provincial traffic that is being bottlenecked really through this part of the province. And I continue to argue that if and when the Morriston bypass is built, it will benefit a big region of Ontario, not just my riding. So it happens, the bottleneck happens to be my riding, but if and when the project is built, and I'm determined to see it move forward, it will benefit Hamilton, it will benefit Guelph, and it'll benefit really a big part of Ontario. So we're going to continue to push that too.
I know when I've been on that stretch through Morriston, sometimes the traffic actually backs up right on the 401,
Yeah, it does.
which is
The exit,
not.
yeah.
It's a very it gets to be very dangerous at some point, and something has to be done in that area. But something has to be done from a bigger perspective as well. And I know we've talked about it before.
We have, yeah. And the problem is too that the way our cities are designed, they're on a grid system. The U.S. has a little bit of an advantage because quite often it's spoke and hub. So you have, your 75 and then the 275, 375, 4. I've traveled all around the world, so I've had a real good education on this.
But ring roads around the city.
Exactly. Yeah. You get these larger rings with the larger numbers, and you can literally bypass entire cities without ever going near them if you don't want to. There seems to be no real plan. So the fact that you tabled that is fantastic, but there has to be some way to get around the problem.
Well, see, the government does have a 5-year plan for new capital construction. It's just getting on the plan.
Right,
And that's our objective. And I don't think anybody in Morriston expects the road to be built next year, or anybody in the area. But we need to know where we are in the government's plan. The government's spending over $2 billion a year on provincial highways. So we'd like to know where we are in that plan, and so we're going to continue to ask.
But a lot of the projects that's undertaken by Metrolinx, part of it was Milton, that has been pushed back to a 15-year horizon now, and the fastest growing municipality, I guess, in North America is right here. Ted, how can they look at something like how can they look at Milton and push back something like GO Transit?
Well, when we're talking about congestion issues, and you hear that's going to be pushed off for 15 years, it doesn't provide any hope that there's any likelihood of a solution anytime soon. And people need to see greater progress in that, and I think there is an obligation upon the government to show leadership in these areas. The government's spending $126 billion a year. And of that amount, they only spend about $13 billion on infrastructure. And that, to me, is out of whack, too, in terms of the overall spending of government. Surely we need to be investing in the basic infrastructure of the province, looking forward to the future generations that will inherit the province that we leave. And I don't think we're doing this generation, and certainly this government is not doing a good job of this.
Well, what does that say for the economy, too? Because what has a tendency to happen is if there's no transportation links or effective transportation links, businesses start questioning, well, is this the place to locate?
Especially manufacturers who need to be confident that they can get their goods away from the plant and to market, and not have them sitting in a truck on a highway in a traffic jam somewhere.
There's a huge cost to that. If you can't move people and goods, your economy comes to a halt.
That's right.
In any environment. And unfortunately, I think a lot of us are looking at the teleworker these days going, oh, we can work from home, but that's not the way our economy works. There's a lot of other, assets to manufacturing that need to get goods from point A to point B so that we can consume them. And when we can't, the price goes up, the cost of living goes up, everything goes up. So we need to fix that.
But Canada is an exporter. And if we can't get to the U.S. to get our raw goods down there and get those produced goods back up here and moved efficiently around, that doesn't bode well.
And access to markets, the U.S. market's an important feature of the Morriston Highway 6 bypass debate too, because Highway 6 off the 401 goes right down to the Niagara Peninsula and becomes a corridor into the United States.
Right.
So that's another thing. And I know that the Township of Whistler is putting together an economic study to demonstrate the economic impact. The Minister of Transportation, or I should say the former Minister, Bob Chiarelli, asked them to do that, and they are working on that right now. So that would enable us, hopefully, to quantify the economic impact of the problem, and then give us more ammunition to get them to move it forward onto the 5-year plan.
Especially being so strategically located at 6, it really gives you better access into the Waterloo area and Wellington County in its entirety. And if you can get by that bottleneck, that would seem to be a real benefit to everybody, including those driving their cars on the 401 that are stopped because of the traffic backing up.
Absolutely true, Mark.
Now,
Thanks.
what happens with your private members bill?
It's a resolution, and by putting it on the order paper, it's intended to draw attention to the issue, and I have every opportunity in the legislature from time to time to speak on bills and issues, and sometimes I sidetrack off to the discussion of the bill that the government's brought forward they're debating to bring up local issues. And
you make that transition
Well, it all
extremely
comes
well.
back.
I've heard a couple of them, Ted, and you do it extremely
I
well.
always try to respect the speaker's rulings because I'm one of the assistant speakers too, but you come back to the main point. But there is an opportunity, of course, many opportunities that we have in the legislature to raise our local issues and try to work with other members to bring forward issues too. So that's my intention.
Yeah, and I guess all you can do until a decision is made is just keep pressing for a decision to be made to give your residents a sense of knowing when it'll be done.
Exactly.
And that would seem to me, if I was a resident, I would just like to know when it's going to be accomplished.
And know that there's some progress being made, some reasonable progress towards the solution to the problem. I agree.
And there's the other issue too is people are not going to get out of their cars. I mean, we always talk about, if we lay more transit down, they will come. Not necessarily. Canada is big. We don't have cities nearly as close, and people need to get from point A to point B. There has to be an incentive for them to get out of their car. So it's not just about saying we're going to have more rail service to the middle of nowhere either. You have to say we're going to bring rail service that makes a lot of sense. It still is amazing to me that we're building this wonderful complex for the Pan Am Games out here and have absolutely no transit around to be seen. They'll probably probably do something for the time being as those things occur, but what happens after? You're going to have all this business going out to Tremaine, going further to the escarpment, and no way of getting anybody out there. And that's a big problem. This area really has to start thinking about making sure that it's gridded up correctly. And there's probably one no size fits all. As you said, we have to have some other relief lines around the city. There's been many things tabled. The problem is that Not in My Backyard starts to kick in as well, where, I don't want this happening here, but the problem's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And all we have to do is leave here at 6 o'clock in the morning and look at James Snow or listen to the news, and it's constantly tied up. There's constantly traffic jams or accidents. People are
even trying to get to the studio tonight from the airport took me an hour and 45 minutes.
I know. And that kind of tells the tale.
Yeah.
On Monday morning, I leave my home in Fergus at about 10 after 5 in the morning, in order to beat the traffic to get downtown. And if I do that, I can usually get downtown Toronto in an hour, 20 minutes, an hour, 30 minutes. If I leave at 5:30 in the morning, which is still pretty early for some people, including me, then I can count on 2 to 3 hours to get to downtown Toronto, and that's how it affects. I mean, I'm not saying it's all about me. It's obviously not. It's about the millions of people who are using the highway every week. But that's just one example
of what wasted time is wasted productivity, and at some point businesses are going to start making decisions about not being able to get their goods to market in a timely fashion.
It becomes a consideration for plants, plant location, and for manufacturing investment. Absolutely it does.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's a negative for us right now, and it's another reason not to invest in Southern
So,
Ontario. Unfortunately.
what I'm hearing you say is that you're in favor of that Niagara to GTA highway.
Well, I know during the provincial election in the past, the Mid-Peninsula corridor that we're
Yes,
talking about,
yes.
is that
Or
the same one?
Mid-Pen, yeah.
And that goes through Niagara region, and Tim Hudak has, because he's a Niagara representative, has supported the region of Niagara in their push in that regard. But I know it is controversial, and it affects other municipalities along the way, in Burlington most notably. And so I think it would be prudent of me to sort of not really indicate a position on that at this time, other than to say that I know that Tim has supported it in the past, and we do need to move forward on many of these transportation projects, in my opinion, if we're going to solve the problems that we've spent the last 15 minutes discussing.
Well, you mentioned, Rob, about the mentality of not in my backyard. Halton Hills had that
Yes.
bypass that they were able to stop,
Yeah.
which
Alternative 4-3 of the GTA West Corridor Study, again, a different proposed highway project, but the GTA West Corridor Study has been ongoing, I think, since 2007. And the Ministry of Transportation trying to come up with proposed improvements to this part of the GTA. And yes, the town of Halton Hills took a strong position against the alternative 4-3 because it would have gone through farmland and cultural areas and for a number of reasons. And I certainly took that forward in the legislature after the 2011 election. And even during the election campaign, I articulated a plan as to what the next member could do in the legislature to support the town's position, and I did that. And I worked with the town council in that regard. And to a large degree, I think we coordinated our efforts. And in the end, the Minister of Transportation did, in fact, agree that it would be better to add lanes to the existing 401, and I think it's a much more cost-effective solution too.
rather
and
than
a
build
sensible
new
solution.
roads,
Yeah, than building
enhance
a
the
brand
ones
new,
that are already there.
extension. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I also know that that Burlington has had the discussion, but when you peel back the onion a little bit, you find that they're just objecting to that cut through the escarpment. I haven't really heard any local councillors complaining about the entire Niagara to GTA or Mid-Pen highway. So they have some concerns about aspects of it, like Halton Hills did, but not necessarily a concern about the whole plan.
Okay.
So that's, at least that's my read on it. And you know something, I want to hear from you, to hear what you've got to say about your transportation needs and how they're being met or aren't being met here in Milton, in Halton Hills, in Fergus, wherever you're watching tonight, because we're live and you can tweet us at #TheIssue. So let's move on to another issue that is always of interest to me, and that's the expense that we are all charged with because of the gas plant. Ted, can you give us some background on the gas plant?
Well, the most recent development, of course, last week was the Auditor General released this report on the cost of cancelling the Oakville power plant. And again, this is very current. It just came out last week. The Auditor General concluded that the total cost of cancelling the gas plants in Oakville and Mississauga was almost $1.1 billion. Previously, we'd been
With a
told
B.
and led to believe that the total cost was around $585 million. This was a number that was generated by the government and by the Ontario Power Authority. But the Auditor General looked at the whole thing and came up with the conclusion that it's $1.1 billion with a B. Now, let's go back a bit. Why did the government cancel these gas plants? As you know,
Because your leader said that he would cancel the plants as well during the election, as did Andrea Horvath.
Well, during the election, I was pretty busy knocking on doors in Wellington, Halton Hills.
Yeah.
And I was paying attention to the needs of the concerns of the people of Wellington, Halton Hills. And I don't even have a firm recollection of what, but certainly the Liberals in response to our criticism have made that point. And I don't know what our local candidate promised exactly, although the Liberals do say that this such and such was promised. Yeah. I think it's also true that we wouldn't have brought in the Green Energy Act that the Liberals brought in, which to a large degree is responsible for the sort of the train of events that led to this. The Green Energy Act was intended, the government said, to create 50,000 new jobs and a new industry in green energy. It led to the FIT program, the feed-in tariff program, where they paid exorbitant, up to 80 cents a kilowatt hour to generators of electricity who had solar panels when they're selling the hydro for less than 5 cents a kilowatt hour, so a big loss on that, as well as the wind farms that we see all over Ontario now, especially in rural Ontario and many communities that don't want them. To the extent that the government relies on wind energy as a larger component of the overall energy mix generating electricity in the province of Ontario, to the extent that they grow the component that's wind, they need gas plants as a backup, because of course when the wind isn't blowing, or when it's blowing too hard, you're not generating electricity. So if you're relying on the windmills, you need some sort of a backup, because people need the power when they need it. And industry needs the power when they need it, when they turn on their machines, or when they turn on the lights at home, or the air conditioner, or what have you. I don't believe that we would have cited or even proposed to cite gas plants in Mississauga where they were doing it, or in Oakville where they were doing it. So, I don't think the problem would have existed had we been in government. But that's hindsight to some degree, and I recognize that. But I still believe that we wouldn't have been into this problem had it not been for the Liberal government, McGuinty government, the Green Energy Act, George Smitherman's Green Energy Acts, and which continues to be perpetuated by the Wynne government. So anyway, $1.1 billion to cancel these gas plants. What could that money have been used for that would have benefited somebody somewhere along? We're talking about infrastructure.
At least a bypass in Morriston.
We would have built a number of bypasses around Morriston if need be. I mean, we just need one.
Yeah.
It could have built hospitals. It could have built schools. It could have built a subway to Scarborough. All these things that money that could have been spent far better than what this was. And again, getting back to why did the government do it? What was the motivation? And especially the Mississauga one during the election campaign, where it appeared that the government canceled the gas plant in Mississauga during the election campaign because they were afraid they were going to lose a couple of their incumbent members who quite frankly, I mean, we all go into election campaigns with issues. We go out and talk to people, we do our work, we talk about the future, but the government was completely negligent in its duty to taxpayers, to the extent it was prepared to incur costs like this to save a few Liberal seats. And if you think about it, as we were talking before the show came on, $1.1 billion for 5 Liberal seats. It is just a gross abuse of taxpayers' money, the likes of which I don't think we've ever seen in the history of the province of Ontario.
Pretty expensive.
Yeah, and it can only, as I said in my press release the day this report came out, it can only be described as outrageous. And their efforts to conceal the true cost of the gas plants can only be described as devious.
What makes it worse, I think, is the fact that it went towards seats. If it's one thing to say we made a mistake and $1 billion was lost because we had cost overruns on a big project that was happening. Okay, not great, still have to explain themselves, but there's no gain out of the loss of $1.1 billion. That $1.1 billion is far more expensive than $1.1 billion because it didn't generate anything. It didn't generate jobs. It didn't generate tax revenue.
It's a lost opportunity.
It's lost opportunity on top of the $1.1 billion. It's even worse.
It's even worse than that because the auditor said that if the government hadn't canceled the Oakville plant, and just sort of let the thing play out on its own, it might not have been built anyway because of the opposition that the community was putting forward in the city of Oakville, or town of Oakville, I should say, and others. And it's possible that the project would have died because the time frame that was in the contract would have lapsed, which wouldn't have cost the taxpayers anything.
Right.
But again, McGuinty apparently, according to published reports, was going around saying it's the uncertainty that's killing us. we've got to create certainty on these two issues. And that leads to the decision then to cancel.
Well,
trying to give political certainty to try and protect those incumbent members who actually should have been doing their jobs and focusing on their responsibilities, and then they would have gone back to their electorates with some degree of confidence instead of being nervous about one issue in their ridings.
The one thing that that I heard the auditor say is that the companies who were contracted to build the plant are better off now financially with the cancellation, and that really concerns me. That's not the way you do business, is it?
No, it is not. And I can't think of a better scenario. Like, hats off to them. They got paid money for doing nothing. You take a look at the aerial shots that they put on the evening news every single night, and it's literally just a concrete wall. And that's pretty much it, with the foundation leveled out. And $1.1 billion, and that's all you have to show for it. That is pathetic. There's no other word for it. And the attitude on it is incredulous. It's one thing to say, I apologize for the way things were handled, and Kathleen Wynne, has said that. But there's a difference between, saying I'm sorry and taking responsibility. And the responsibility does lie on the Liberal government, and the Liberal government right now, the head of the Liberal government, the person running that ship, has to account for those indiscretions.
She was
And
in
let's
on the
not forget-
decision making.
That's right. Let's not forget, she was a senior cabinet minister during the time that the decisions were made. And no one person makes these decisions. It's a cabinet decision, clearly, and a campaign team. But she was also the co-chair of the Liberal campaign, the re-election campaign in 2011. So she was involved in a couple of ways, and she may try to distance herself from the decision and pretend that others were involved, but it's not going to wash, and people are not going to buy it. And in fact, she signed one of the key documents that led to the decision too, in her capacity, I think, as Minister of Municipal Affairs, if I'm not mistaken. So, there has to be accountability. She would say she's apologized and she wants to move on. Well, that's fine. We're not prepared to move on this. And it's also true, I believe, that if the Liberals think they can get away with this, they'll do it again and again and again. And we were talking earlier about the spending scandals, whether it be the e-health, where, again, about $1 billion was spent, very little to show for it, according to the Auditor General. The Orange Air Ambulance, where hundreds of millions of dollars has been wasted, and the examples go on and on. They just don't seem, there seems to be a pattern where they just don't seem to care about the proper and appropriate expenditure of taxpayers' money. They think there's no limit to it, and they can get away with it, so they just keep doing it.
And on that note, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back afterwards to find out if this issue has legs with you, the public. So you can get in touch with us at #TheIssue. We'll be right back.
When Matt was born, he changed our lives. And at 2, he was the most beautiful child alive.
When he started school, his disability was obvious, and he still was the most beautiful child alive.
It wasn't easy raising a child with autism, but we've been lucky and have had help.
Our beautiful child is a man now, and we worry. What on earth will he do when we're gone?
Hi, I'm Kirk Robinson, your host for Auto Experts on TV Cogeco. I'm excited to announce you can now watch Auto Experts live on HD on Channel 700. Remember, tune into Auto Experts and stay in tune with your car.
It is my great great honor to present to you the graduates of the Bachelor of Game Design.
You're watching TV Cogeco, truly local television.
Welcome back to The Issue. I'm Mark Carr. We've got Rob Duvall from the community, a community activist with us, and the Member of Provincial Parliament for Wellington, Halton Hills, Ted Arnott. Ted, incidentally, let's take a little stop for a second. You've been an MPP for an awfully long time, and you're so young. And you're so young. You
when
were
I look
the
at myself in
youngest.
the mirror in the morning, I don't see a young person. But thank you very much. I appreciate you saying that.
You were the youngest member of provincial.
Well, one of the younger
one
ones.
of the younger
When I
ones.
was first elected,
Yeah.
I was the youngest in my caucus. But Jim Wilson, who's still in the
Oh, yeah.
legislature as well, and now my seatmate again, the MPP for Simcoe Grey, he and I are virtually the same age. I think I'm 2 or 3 days, maybe 4 days younger than he is. And there was a NDP member at the time in 1990 when he and I were first elected with others, including your brother Gary Carr.
Yeah.
Kimball Sutherland, who was the MPP for Oxford, who was I think 24 at the time. Jim and I were 27. So, it's somewhat unusual. But I in our area, Perrin Beatty was first elected at the House of Commons when I think he was 21 in 1972. So when I was running the first time, as much as I was a very youthful type of person and a fresh face, it wasn't completely unusual for the people of at least the Wellington County part of my riding to imagine a young person doing the job. So I was indebted to Perrin for sort of blazing the trail for a young person. But it's been 23 years. It's been an enormous privilege to serve the people of Wellington and then Waterloo Wellington and now Wellington Halton Hills through those years. And every day you hope to make a difference, and that's what motivates me to look forward to the next challenge and hope to make a difference for the people in my riding.
You just don't look like you've been there for 23 years. Credit
I appreciate that.
credit
Thank
to
you.
you. And I guess your kids grew up not knowing
Well, maybe
you
my
as-
kids keep me young because you chase them around trying to keep up with them.
but not knowing anything else than Dad is a member of provincial parliament.
Yeah, we have 3 sons. They are 18, 16, and 14 years of age now. They're great guys, and they've had to put up with my absences. But my wife obviously has done a wonderful job raising them, and I try to be home as often as I can. Sometimes I have to turn down community events on the weekends, and I just simply say, sorry, I'd like to come, but I have a family commitment. And people by and large realize when you have a family and you've got kids that are growing up, they need their dad at home once in a while, and need to maintain your connection with your family if you're going to do your job that way.
Understanding
which is
wife
necessary.
is
And an understanding and
is
supportive spouse. Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
necessary.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Lisa teaches core French, and she's got a professional job that she believes passionately, and she does a great job too. So we've got a very busy household, but my wife's mom lives with us too, so that helps us keep it all together and keep it going.
Isn't that
Thank
terrific?
you very much for asking.
No,
I
it's
appreciate
something that I think the folks out there should know a little bit about the family life of if they see you down at the legislature standing up giving speeches. They've got to know that you do have a family and all those good things. So
Thank you.
We were talking before the break about the power plant, and Rob, is your sense the community is still angry about this?
I think they are. We're still moving very slowly out of a recession. Fortunately, Canada wasn't hit nearly as much as all our other neighbors, whether it be across the pond or just south of us. But what I'm finding is that things are very touchy. It's a very fragile economy, and people do continue, especially in manufacturing, like you brought up, Ted, to lose their jobs. And $1 billion would go a long way, and not just one. There's been 3 big chunks, whether it be hydro, whether it be Orange, whether it be e-health, all those things, and what I always learned is from my father, 3 strikes you're out. I think we're there. I mean, no one minds over costs and runs on some of these things, but when you just waste billions, and we're not talking 1 year, we're talking more like 3 billion when you calculate all those other things in and the amount of economic loss, you have to look in the mirror sometimes and go, wait a second, what is it that's going on here? Because I just lost my job and now all this money is being wasted. You have to start to make those changes. People really do need to go out and vote more, especially now, because they're not going to be heard unless they check off a box at the ballot. It's very important. It's the one right we have. And we don't have many of them.
And that's a very good point. And actually, the participation in the provincial election last time declined to something around 50%, which should concern all of us. And we're coming up on Remembrance Day, of course, in November next month. And you think of the generation that fought in the First World War and the Second World War to preserve our liberties and our freedoms, including the right to vote, and how the world would have changed had those great generations not done what they did, and the world would be living in today. And people fought and died for our right to vote, and it's very disappointing to me to see that turnout going down instead of up. And we would encourage more and more people, obviously, to participate in the political process. And some people say, you know, I'm turned off by the whole thing, and they're all a bunch of scoundrels and so forth. And I can understand some of the cynicism, but I also would challenge people, well, if we're going to make it better, people like you, good people, need to participate. And it's absolutely essential that more and more people get involved in our political discussion. It's not just, you know, the arguments in the House, but it's the reconciliation of the differences that exist in society, how we're going to resolve them, how we're going to make the decisions that are going to build the province for the future. And if people don't care about the future, they should start thinking about their kids and their grandkids, because they should care about the future, and I think most do. But sometimes I think we need to put that into perspective for them. And again, we've got to get more and more people to participate in the political process and in how government is organized and how the decisions are made.
But every political party, provincially, federally, even local politicians, seem to concentrate on immediate issues, and there's nobody having that longer view of things. And doesn't that give the voting public the right just to look at those immediate issues without having concern for the next generation?
Well, I accept that, but I would say in response, I think there is an obligation on the part of the political parties to be thinking long-term, not just to the next election. In a minority provincial parliament that we have now, we're about 2 years past the last election, and yes, there's no question that members of the legislature, if they're running for re-election, candidates that are considering running for other parties to try to win seats, people are thinking about how they're going to win an election. I understand that completely, but there has to be a longer-term vision that's brought to the decision-making table, so that long-term considerations are a big part of the decision-making process, not just politicians thinking, how can I win the next election? To me, that's not good enough, and we all have a responsibility. Those of us who are elected to look on the horizon. And you know, you mentioned manufacturing jobs. In 2005, before the recession, before the economic or the financial meltdown, I heard Perrin Beatty, who was I mentioned him earlier, my predecessor as a member of Parliament for our area, and I worked with him for a period of time where our terms coincided. But he was the head of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and before that, the head of the Canadian Manufacturers Association. He gave a speech in Kitchener talking about the challenges that our manufacturing sector was going to face in the coming years. This is back in 2005. And listening to him, and knowing him as I do and trusting his views, I brought forward a resolution in the legislature to support what he was saying, which was the fact that we needed to have an action plan as to how we could strengthen the competitiveness of our manufacturing industries, and have a discussion involving business, involving labor, all the key players, so as to develop an action plan of what we could do to strengthen and support our manufacturing jobs, to preserve our existing jobs, and to make our jurisdiction more competitive for industrial investment. And my resolution was passed in the legislature asking that a standing committee have these public hearings to develop an action plan, and the government refused to have the public hearings. Well, then 2008 hit. We had the Great Recession, but even before that, because of the strength of the Canadian dollar growing vis-a-vis the American dollar, we started to bleed manufacturing jobs, and we've lost about 300,000 good-paying manufacturing jobs since 2005. And I'm never going to say that, you know, if my resolution had been adopted, we would have saved all those jobs. But at least we would have sent a signal to the manufacturing sector that the provincial government understands you've got problems, and we're trying to find a way to help. And hopefully some of it would have been positive in terms of maintaining jobs or creating new ones. And I still continue to, you know, when I look back, you know, shake my head in disappointment at the fact that the government, the McGuinty government of the day, wouldn't recognize this problem. When there were senior business leaders like Perrin Beatty at the time who were, you know, looking on the horizon. As leadership, you know, that's what it's about to a large degree. It's not just sort of organizing what we're doing today. It's looking on the horizon to see what the problems are that are coming 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, to the extent that we can see, you know, even farther down the road. And developing policies and plans so that we can overcome those challenges and turn them into opportunities.
That sounds great. Unfortunately, not everyone has those opinions to look at the long term, and that is true leadership, isn't it, Rob?
Oh, completely. The reason that you take a look at all the great things that whether it be Canada has done, or even around, you know, the jurisdiction of these big projects that have happened way long ago. You look at the TTC; they're fighting about that right now. They didn't build any brand new lines really to speak of for the last 50 years. I mean, like you have to hand it to the people that were making the decisions of those days, saying we're going to look 50 years down the road, 30 years down the road. And what happens is we're living in this society now that likes the soundbite. And we're shrinking everything down to what's going to happen in the next 2, 3, 4 years. And you're absolutely right. It's just not good enough.
Which creates politicians who want to give that soundbite and not the longer-term view of society.
Well, ideally, you have to do both. I mean, you do have to. We live in the media environment that we're in today. Sir John A. Macdonald would scratch his head, I'm sure, if he was here, wondering how he was going to respond to it. But at the same time, those of us that are charged with responsibility in public life right now, we live in that media environment. We have to do both, as far as I'm concerned, and look at the long term too, not just the 30-second soundbite.
Is part of the issue the way we're voting? In other words, our system of first past the post. You can win an election and not have a majority of support in that area that you're running. We attempted to change it. The Liberals put it up for debate last time. Didn't seem to go anywhere. So, is the system something that we have to look at?
We've spawned a generation of people who don't even understand the difference between municipal, provincial, and federal responsibility. And therein lies the problem. If the people who are voting are not educated on what their government can do for them, whether it be local, provincial, federal, then you're already losing the battle. It's really up to the rest of us, whether it be, you know, adults, sit down with your kids, talk to them, make sure that they go and see or go and listen to candidates running in the area. Really listen to what they have to say. You don't have to agree with them. Quite often, they don't even agree with each other. You know, like, you just have to listen and go, I really don't think that's a good idea, but they don't even take the time, because now it's even hard to get somebody's attention. And these are adults as well. These are friends of mine. It's hard to keep their attention for longer than 10 minutes before they go, you know what, you're just boring me now. And they're on to the next thing. And I try to keep them
I had that
entertained.
problem.
I know.
Talking about politics, but I didn't
And it has nothing to do with
Yeah.
your personality.
Oh,
Bob.
thank you very much for saying that. But I'm finding that it's becoming harder and harder and harder over time to really get them engaged, especially young people. I really made it a point to, when the kids were old enough to vote, that they actually went out and voted. And at first they went kicking and screaming. Now they actually pay attention. Did you hear so-and-so said this? And did you know that this was going on? And they actually showed up. And one of the ladies at the voting poll in the last election said, my, oh my, it's great to see someone young coming out. She actually went out of her way to say it out loud in front of a lineup of people because it was so rare. See, that's the problem. It was nice of her to say that, but it was so rare to see it, that this is the type of generation now that's coming in where they're willing to do their fight and say what they have to say, and they have great, wonderful ideas, but they're not putting it on paper with a checkbox. And we need to change that. We all need to change that. If there's anything that I can say to anybody, if you don't like the way things are, you have to change it. Get involved.
Get involved in this show. Hashtag the
Yes.
issue. Let's hear what you've got to say. Ted, with less than 50% of the people voting, who do you look at as being your constituents? Is it that smaller section of the population that you know will get out and vote, and really beyond that you really don't care who goes out and vote,
No.
as long as that core gets out?
When I reach out at election time, you do need to reach out to the voters, the people who you believe will vote. But if you're entrusted with the responsibility of being a member of provincial parliament, which I have been fortunate to have, I do make an effort to represent all the people who live in our riding. And that includes people who didn't vote. That includes people who I know didn't vote for me. That includes people who perhaps are citizens of another country but live in our riding. And when I'm knocking on doors, I meet, you meet all kinds of people, and I meet a lot of people who say, I'd like to vote for you because I think you're doing a good job or whatever, but I'm not a Canadian citizen, but I'm a permanent resident of Canada. In my old riding of Waterloo Wellington, I had a large number of Old Order Mennonite communities in my riding, and the Old Order Mennonites conscientiously have chosen not to vote and participate in that way. And you respect that because it's a religious conviction, but you still represent those people. And when they have an issue, and I had a number of meetings over the course of my tenure in Waterloo Wellington with the leadership of the Old Order Mennonite communities on issues. And yeah, you make time for them, and you go to bat for them in every way, even knowing that they're not going to vote in the next provincial election. I do feel that responsibility to represent every single person who lives in my riding.
It's going to be difficult looking at politics from the outside as we do. It's got to be hard not to focus on just those people are going to vote. I mean, even the check boxes when you're canvassing with a candidate indicate yes, no, maybe. And the focus is on those yeses. The no's and the maybes can wait for another day. Is that really the way our voting system should work?
Well, it's not probably the way it should work, but it's understandable. I think most people get into politics because they feel that they can make a change for the better. They feel that they can truly make a change in their community. It certainly isn't the pay, because in private money, you could probably make a lot more than what a lot of very influential people make on the higher echelon of any political stream. Saying that, I think that what you try and do is your core. You try and get them in. You try and get them to rally up and vote you in because you've said, this is the type of change that I want to make. And I think that's perfectly acceptable. And then, but what you said, Ted, is, I'm glad you said it, is even when you know, and in this particular case it was because of their religious conviction, you know that they don't vote. It wasn't that they voted for one person over another. That mentally makes it easier, I'm sure, but you represent everybody. And that, I think it's really important to make sure that that happens. Who I would want to vote in is someone who represents everyone regardless of any situation, because at the end of the day, whether you win or lose for the party that you're looking for, that person is going to represent you, whether you like it or not. They represent you, so you must have that voice.
And I would say you want to represent everybody, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to agree with everybody.
Right. That's true.
And people need to understand
So
that too, because you
there's
have
a
to take a
difference.
position on issues, and we're expected to vote on the votes in the legislature, the resolutions, the bills, and you do take a position when you cast a vote in the legislature and you stand up and have your name called. And so, but at the same time, I think people recognize, the vast majority recognize that we have a parliamentary system. You're a member of a caucus or you're an independent. Most of the time you're going to be voting with your caucus if you're in a parliamentary system of government. Occasionally you might vote against the wishes of your party leader. Occasionally
I
free
know
votes.
a couple of situations
Yes,
that I
yes.
could talk about, but I
know,
won't.
yeah. And that's part of the process too. But to say that, and certainly my focus and my endeavor has always been to represent everybody, and I hope that over time people see that.
And I guess I understand that most go into politics with that ideal in mind of doing something good. They can get jaded awfully quickly,
Well,
though.
the enthusiasm and the idealism of the new members coming in the door after an election is always an inspiration and a breath of fresh air in the legislature. And, you know, we talk about new people not being able to find the washrooms. And sometimes, you know, you do need a map to the washrooms in any new job. But at the same time, to have that breath of fresh air coming in the door is always a good thing. Because, yeah, I think, you know, to some degree, there is cynicism in the Ontario legislature, just as there's cynicism in our communities across the province. And I think all of us who run would hope to make a positive difference for our communities or the issues we care about. And that's what motivates the vast majority of candidates going into an election campaign, the desire to make a difference. And that's one of the positive things that I see in the legislature. And it is good to have some new people coming in the door. And in the next provincial election, we hope there are a whole bunch of new Progressive Conservative members coming in the door to provide that kind of leadership.
You are also is it deputy speaker?
I'm one of the assistant
One
speakers.
of the assistants.
The job title is
speakers.
First Deputy Chair of the Committee of the Whole House.
Yeah.
And nobody knows what the title is except me and the clerk and
Okay.
a couple of others. But it's one of the assistant speakers. So what I do is I fill in as the acting speaker on Monday afternoons, essentially from 1:30 till 6.
So you must have more insight than a regular MPP. You talked earlier about cynicism. Isn't that fueled a lot by what we see in question period? And don't you, as the assistant speaker or whatever the title is, have control to stop that?
Well, I think cynicism in our society today about politics is part of a larger problem. There's cynicism about every public institution, and there are many people who don't really know who they can trust anymore when it comes to public institutions, and that's a problem for our society too. It's not just the political side of it. But you mentioned question period and the behavior in question period. And, you know, we do have television cameras, and the behavior in question period is not what it should be. Usually it's only a handful of members that misbehave chronically and consistently. But many members on occasion will offer an interjection, perhaps that whoever has the floor would prefer not take place, and I recognize that too. But it is the Speaker's job to try and maintain order and try to keep to allow the member who has the floor to make their case and make their points, and have a civil discussion as opposed to sort of a free-for-all that seems like a three-ring circus that never ends. And I don't think we do ourselves a service when we behave that way. I try to behave myself in the legislative chamber, and I think as one of the people who occasionally goes into the chairs, as I said, as the acting speaker on Monday afternoons, a greater obligation perhaps on me to behave myself and treat I think we show respect for the institution when we behave professionally and appropriately in the chamber, but we show respect for some of the institutions of Parliament as well as democracy itself when we show respect for the election of other members. Maybe we don't agree with them, maybe we wish they hadn't been elected, but at least we respect the fact that they were elected by their communities and they have a legitimacy attached to that too, that we respect as members of the opposition. So that's the way we should behave in an ideal world. But again, in parliamentary democracy, and it's the same thing in Great Britain, it's the same thing in Ottawa and many of the provincial legislatures, the behavior isn't what it should be. And to the extent that people see it, I agree, it makes people more disappointed about the resolution of their concerns.
And it makes them cynical about
Yes.
about politics.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, in the last couple of minutes here, I just want to ask you some quick questions. What did you think about the federal budget?
Well,
In 30 seconds or less.
30 seconds or less. I really like the fact that they're trying to do something with telecommunication companies. I think we need more free market. I think it brings a lot of opportunity in technology as well as competitiveness, and we as consumers gain from that every single time. You could throw up 1,000 examples, and every single time you will not see anything bad come of it. So I think the whole scary issue of, oh, you're going to get less service. Anyone who has lived in Canada in the last 10 years probably knows that that's not going to be true. So I say bring it on and let us make our own choices.
So you were pleased with the budget?
I liked it.
Okay. Ted, when do you think the next election is going to occur in Ontario?
In due course.
I said you have 30 seconds, so you want to draw that out a little bit more? No, do you have a sense of whether because I know the Conservative stance has been you are against what's happening, but in 30 seconds, can you tell us when you think the next election is going to be?
When the New Democrats decide to vote against the government on a confidence motion, that will be when an election takes place, if they all show up and if they all vote with us to hold the government to account. At that point, the government will have to call an election.
Ted, I appreciate you being here. You got to come back and
Thank you very much.
see us.
I really
It's
appreciate
great having
Great
you
to-
on
you
the
do
show.
a super job too, and thank you very much, Rob.
Thank
as
you,
well.
Rob. You got to come back because I know you will.
Always.
I think you
I'm
live,
starting to like
I think
the
you
area
live
here.
just outside of the studio here.
I do, yeah.
So please come back. I've enjoyed the discussion tonight, and we'll continue it live again next week. I also want to thank all our volunteers. This show is put on by volunteers on the cameras and in the control room, and we want to thank them very much for being involved with TV Cogeco. So, on behalf of the panel and on behalf of TV Cogeco, thanks for watching The Issue. I'm Mark Carr for TV Cogeco, truly local television.